translators are not mine. He typed it in Google Translator, so I don't know.
Do you want to sit on that side? Then we can kind of bracket the two other speakers. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, many friends. Thank you for coming this morning. As might be expected on the final days of the COP, we're having a few final challenges as we've had people make their way home already, and we've also had some logistical issues we're still working out. But I would invite the speakers to come and join us on the stage whenever they're ready in the next couple minutes, and then we'll get started with the program. Okay, everyone, I think we're about to get started. Apologies for the delay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in this issue. We're going to talk about unlocking climate finance to support high forest, low deforestation regions. We have two wonderful speakers here with us today live, and we have one that's going to be, we have a video from Guyana, which we'll be showing at the end. So in terms of the order, we're going to change things up a little bit from what we expected. We'll have our speakers talk about the perspectives from the government of Peru and from the indigenous people's perspective within the Amazon, but also within Peru. I'll do a little bit of stage setting right at the beginning before we have those two speakers go ahead. And then we'll pause and have a question and answer session from the audience and a little bit of back and forth and discussion. And then at the end of the session, I'll play the video from Guyana in full so that you can see the whole thing uninterrupted. So with that, I'd like to begin. I'm Jason Funk. I'm the Director of Red Plus Strategy for Conservation International. I have my colleague here, Gustavo Souza, who's the America's Climate and Policy Director. And we can jump right in. I'm going to do a bit of stage setting with a few slides, and then we'll turn to our speakers. So what is this about? What is high forest, low deforestation? What does it mean? This is a concept that's been around for a while, since the 1990s. This is not a new thing. And it was originally defined when we were talking about the forest transition theory, the idea that there were countries that had a change in the way they managed their forests, and that resulted in a shift from a lot of forest to a loss of forest, and then a restoration of forest over the course of their development pathway. So that was the first time this idea was introduced, the idea that there were countries who remained high forest and low deforestation at the beginning of that curve. But at that stage, it was just a concept. In the 2000s, then, this was defined further, and we began to put some numbers on what that means, and we began to categorize countries and define which ones were in this status of HFLD. That was defined in a short paper written in the late 2000s. By the 2010s, we had seen this concept be taken up in financial climate finance in the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, which created a special designation for these HFLD countries and created some tools to direct finance to them. And in the process, those countries would end up generating some credits that could later be available for transactions. Subsequently, just in the past couple of years, we saw the Art Trees group develop a standard that would allow crediting to happen specifically for HFLD countries and jurisdictions. And those credits can then be transacted to sovereigns through Article 6 type mechanisms, and they would also be available for transactions in the voluntary carbon market with corporate entities to help them meet their targets. So this was a new development, but building on a concept that had been around for a long time, and it was a recognized gap in finance and needs. Once that standard was developed and approved, then it was subsequently adopted by ICAO to approve for transactions in the CORSIA mechanism, which covers aviation emissions. Next slide, please. So what does it mean? How do we define high forest, low deforestation now? In general, it can apply to countries and jurisdictions and programs or indigenous territories, but it's not something that applies at the project level. It's because we're talking about a characterization of a large area, not just a single site or project. Most definitions say that it has to be greater than 50% forest cover and retain that forest cover. And the most commonly used definition says the rate of loss of forest, the low deforestation component, that has to be less than 0.22% per year. That was the original number that was defining this category in the late 2000s, and it just sort of stuck. So we still use that today. Next slide, please. And the significance is that there's this small number of countries and a handful of jurisdictions, about 12 countries, then a set of subnational jurisdictions in 9 countries, 39 subnational jurisdictions in total, that meet this definition. And so it's a relatively small segment of the countries, but it's an important one because they are the stewards of these forests that remain intact, have high biodiversity, are the homes of the indigenous peoples and local communities that protect them. And so we want to make sure that this is an area that's being well supported, and that's what the intent is with these finance mechanisms so far. This gap has been identified from the very beginning and then sort of subsequently refined in the post-Paris era. The original paper that categorized those countries, the De Fonseca paper in 2007, had this quote: "Without the opportunity to sell carbon credits, HFLD countries would be deprived of a major incentive to maintain their low deforestation rates." So it was acknowledged right at the very beginning that there would be a need for specialized finance for these countries. I was part of an effort that completed and published a paper in 2019 that sort of refined that further and said to amend the current lack of support, these stable forest areas should be considered and consciously added to the portfolio of finance mechanisms, in particular by companies, also by sovereigns. And these things would drive resources and investment toward the long-term sustainability of these forest resources. So that's a little clunkier than that original statement, but it also gets very specific about saying we need to have a special tool within the HFLD window to direct finance to these places. Next slide, please. And then just recently, we launched this paper last week, which is a collaboration of several organizations. It goes by the title Project Preservation, focusing on high forest, low deforestation jurisdictions, which is really making the case for how corporates could adopt and utilize these credits to meet their own commitments. Next slide, please. And there are a number of key messages in that report I just want to touch on quickly. So the first one is to acknowledge the fact that without these HFLD places, we cannot really achieve 1.5 or keep it within reach. That's because they have such vast carbon resources that if that carbon is lost, it'll put us beyond 1.5. But also these forests continue to provide the service of sequestration. They contribute a significant amount to the ongoing forest carbon sink every year. So if that function is lost, that will further put 1.5 out of reach. In terms of the credits themselves, we just want to emphasize the fact that the standards so far that have been developed, the ART tree standard, but also the FCPF standard, are designed to be conservative to avoid overcrediting. So they're reliable. We can ensure the fact that this isn't a real climate contribution. A second point then, that these credits can play an ongoing role, not just in safeguarding the HFLD areas themselves, but also buttressing the deforestation reduction work that's happening in other places. That's because they help to backstop against the leakage pressure that's driven by those mitigation efforts elsewhere. HFLDs are the place where that could go, and so by protecting them in advance, we help to ensure that they are not affected by that kind of leakage dynamic. And then finally, this is part of a comprehensive approach. The finance for HFLDs is something that's needed in a global sense to ensure that we're not always just chasing the next frontier of deforestation, that we're addressing all forests around the world holistically, and we're not allowing the ongoing pressures to cause damage in these pristine places. So I can see the next slide, and then this is just wrapping things up. Part of this report was a description of how we project or would propose that these HFLD credits could fit within a company's mitigation strategy. We know that companies, if you can see at the top, their business as usual emissions would continue rising, and we've asked them to take steep reduction targets that they have to achieve within their own value chains. That's the part above that curved line. Eventually we want them to reach net zero emissions, but we know there will be some residual left. So everything below the line here is the beyond value chain mitigation that they could do, and we think that could have a couple components. We encourage companies to invest in emissions reductions in the land sector where they can, but we also think there's a role for these HFLD credits to play in the buttressing that I just talked about, preventing that leakage, preventing from these areas from succumbing to the pressures that will be happening in the context of decarbonization. So we think this component of consistent and stable finance for HFLDs is essential, and that companies can play a key role in, by purchasing these credits, they can help to provide that support. If you'd like to learn more, this is the website where you can find the report. You can scan the QR code there to take a look at that. It'll take you directly to that spot. And we've got a little bit of background there related to that report. So that's just the stage setting I wanted to provide for those a little less familiar or who want to know sort of what's the current state of affairs. Now I want to turn to our speakers to talk about, from their perspective, how they think about this issue, what the challenges have been for them, and what they could see the opportunities being in the future if this HFLD finance comes through. So first, I'll hand it to Milagros to introduce yourself, and then give us a few comments.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation, and good morning. Good morning to all. My name is Milagros Sandoval, and I'm the General Director for Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment of Peru. And, okay. And is that better? Yeah, thank you. So I think that mainly these HFLD issues are definitely important, but I want to bring the experience and what we have been discussing in Peru. Peru is an HFLD country, but right now it is in that tipping point in which we can become a bigger deforested country. So right now, the funding opportunities are the most important right now to avoid going to another set of, or another category of countries. Why? Peru, around 60% of Peru's territory is forest. And mainly, it's where the Amazon basin begins. Thanks to this different geography in all the country. And this is something really important, but I would like also to highlight that not only is the 60%, it also has, we have 60% of forest, but we have specific areas that are very important on carbon, especially peatlands. We are the second country with the biggest extension of peatlands in the world, after Indonesia. So we are in this important moment in which definitely, if we don't start to highlight these issues, and not only highlight the issues, but also start to identify the opportunities, the funding opportunities that are needed to support this process and to avoid going to a next category of deforestation. So, but speaking about HFLDs, we definitely, and I think it's great to have my sister Tabea here, because when we speak about HFLDs, and especially of those areas where there's more carbon stored, we're speaking about indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples that are the stewards and have been conserving these important areas in which we can still find that there are standing forests. But when we speak about standing forest, I would like also to understand that we're not only speaking about trees. We're speaking about livelihoods. We're speaking about people that depend 100% on those forests, especially on, for example, what I mentioned, peatlands. Many indigenous communities rely on the products that we can find in peatlands, superfruits, important biodiversity that can support their livelihoods. But so, to support the possibility of conserving these important areas in Peru, we find that it's important to have a diversity of opportunities. One's related to funding, relating to carbon, but that's not only it. We have to include also the diversity of, for example, having value chains related to the superfruits that are so important, and that many of our Amazon countries are giving important products in overall for nutrition, and that are linked to these important fruits and products that come from the Amazon, and that definitely we need to have a better value chains to support those areas. And also, I would like to highlight that definitely, to really understand the importance of these countries and importance of what's coming in, we need better information. We have been working in Peru to update our reference level. The reference level, what it tells us is that we're an HFLD. But obviously, we are, as I mentioned, in this verge, in this tipping point in which if we do not avoid reducing deforestation in Peru, we can become another sort of country. So this is why I think it is important to understand that the funding opportunities need to flow through different ways and have that diversity of these options. One of these also, it is important to understand that different circumstances within the subnational territories, because it is important to identify specifically where these areas are. We have identified the peatlands. Actually, today we also have a peatland side event in which we are going to highlight these important areas for Peru and for other countries where there are definitely this carbon is stored and that it's irrecoverable. And that's also part of what I understand CI has been working on during the last years. Also, it is for us, it is quite important to understand that the funding opportunities have to go specifically to those areas that are where indigenous peoples are. And that's part of what we have been bringing the proposals that come from Peru. We are supporting this Amazon Indigenous Red that indigenous peoples have been discussing. This is called RIA, which is Red Indigenous Amazon or Red Amazon Indigenous, however you want to put it in the acronym in English. But why? Because this is the voice of indigenous peoples. This is what we want, this is the proposal that they're bringing through, and that definitely we as a government, we are trying to support. We have been discussing also with Tabea and other colleagues from IDESEP as well as other indigenous federations. How do they reflect their needs and priorities also in a registry that we're currently doing, that is our National Registry for Mitigation Measures. This registry is going to identify what activities are being done on the ground and where we can identify also if these areas are very important for carbon, if they can support activities related to indigenous peoples. It's going to be also bring transparency around this process, and also it's going to support the or it's going to authorize the transference of emission reductions, and especially related to three main areas. One is related to the NDC, the other one is related to voluntary carbon markets, and the third but not last, the one related to Article 6. So this is what our registry is going to reflect. We're trying to bring all of this information related to HFLDs and other information that we have been designing or elaborating in the country, and how that this can reflect on the registry so that it can support also the work that's being done, obviously on the ground and through the support of indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milagros. I want to turn next to our next speaker, and I think she's going to speak in Spanish. She's here to represent the views of indigenous people in the Amazon, but also an indigenous perspective with relation to this issue. And I think Claudia is going to be able to provide us with a little bit of translation, so thank you, Claudia, for stepping in. Go ahead.
Buenos días a todos y todas. Mi nombre es Tabea Cacique, mujer indígena de pueblo Axénica de Atalaya, Ucayali, Perú. Consejo directivo de AIDESEP, Asociación Interétnica de Desarrollo de la Selva Peruana, es una organización nacional, tiene sede en Lima. También consejo directivo de la COICA.
Good morning, my name is Tabea. I'm from Ucayali, Peru, and I belong to IDESEP, which is the Indigenous Federation of Peru, and one of the subnational organizations based on Ucayali.
Para los pueblos indígenas, nosotros desde nuestras comunidades venimos protegiendo, conservando y cuidando nuestros bosques, porque van más allá de pensar que esa área es vida para nosotros como pueblos indígenas. Nos provee de todo, por eso lo valoramos, lo cuidamos, lo protegemos. La espiritualidad siempre está presente en todo momento.
So, for indigenous peoples, protecting our forest is more than protecting the trees, because for us it's our way of life, it's a spiritual way to seeing the world. So it is very important for us to see this in an integral way.
Por eso creemos que los pueblos indígenas vienen cuidando sus bosques, viene protegiendo. Si no estarían los pueblos indígenas asentadas en las comunidades, no existirían los bosques.
And that's why we as indigenous peoples have been protecting and conserving our forest. If we were not there, the forest would disappear.
Este mecanismo HFLD es un tema que hemos escuchado por mucho tiempo, pero aún nos falta conocer aún más los jefes de las comunidades, ¿no?, existentes en los territorios.
We have been hearing about the HFLD mechanism for a while, but we feel that we need to understand it a little bit better and to bring it to the local, down to the communities.
Este mecanismo creemos que está a favor de los pueblos indígenas porque se evidencia en últimos tiempos que más atención, más beneficio le están dando a los que deforestan, no a los que protegen o los que conservan.
So we feel that this mechanism will be more beneficial for indigenous peoples because we feel that other incentives are incentivizing people that deforest and not people that conserve like us.
Para nosotros como pueblos indígenas, los conocimientos tradicionales, los conocimientos propios es muy importante, porque a través de los conocimientos conservamos nuestras plantas medicinales, conservamos nuestra seguridad alimentaria, para nosotros las chacras integrales, los productos propios de la zona. Hablar de clima, hablar de diversidad biológica, para nosotros como pueblos indígenas no es ajena, es uno solo.
So for us, preserving our traditional knowledge is very important. Our medicinal plants, ensuring our food security, conserving biodiversity is not something that we are unfamiliar with. It's part of our lives.
Por eso pedimos de que nos apoyen en fortalecer capacidades a nuestros hermanos y hermanas, nuestros niños, nuestros jóvenes, tomar en cuenta a los sabios, estos hermanos y hermanas sabias que transmiten los conocimientos para no perder los conocimientos propios, el uso de las medicinas existentes en nuestros bosques.
And that's why we need support, we need help, we need capacity building that could help us preserve this knowledge, and all the knowledge from the wise men, from the communities, needs to be transferred to the younger generations.
Para nosotros, la tecnología actual es muy importante. Aplicar, conocer con nuestros conocimientos propios y aplicar, ¿no?, la tecnología actual. Es muy importante en tema de cuidado, de protección, manejo de drones, ¿no?, GPS, esa tecnología que nos ayuda, ¿no? Nosotros conocemos nuestras prácticas propias, pero nos ayuda con la tecnología actual. Y es importante que los jóvenes actuales manejen estas tecnologías.
At the same time, we feel that modern technology and science is very important, and it complements our traditional knowledge, and we need to train our younger people in the communities to use this technology to conserve our forests.
El fortalecimiento de capacidades debe siempre tomarse en cuenta para nosotros como pueblos indígenas. No estamos en contra de temas de carbono, pero queremos conocer más para poder sentarnos, negociar como pueblos indígenas.
So capacity building is a very important aspect for us. We are not against carbon projects, but we need to know more, we need to understand them better.
Quiero comentar en relación en la pandemia, cuando los pueblos indígenas nos encerramos para evitar la proliferación de la pandemia en las comunidades y nosotros con nuestras plantas nos cuidamos, nos protegimos, ¿no?, a la comunidad entera, los pueblos indígenas, y nos salvamos de la pandemia. No hubo casos mortales ¿no?, evidentes en los pueblos indígenas que estábamos en las comunidades porque nos atendimos con las plantas medicinales en su momento.
I just want to tell that during the COVID pandemic, we all went back to our communities and we all were protected with our medicinal treatments and plants. So the pandemic didn't hit us very strong thanks to that traditional knowledge.
Quisiera pedirles desde acá, como país, Perú, somos un país pluricultural, multilingüe, existe 54 pueblos indígenas, 51 amazónicos y 4 andinos, y creemos que a través de estos conocimientos diferenciados de cada pueblo, porque no todos somos iguales, cada quien tenemos nuestros propios conocimientos, pero que venimos conservando, protegiendo tradicionalmente. Muchísimas gracias.
So I would like to ask you, we are a multicultural country with over 60 indigenous peoples, and all this knowledge need to be preserved, and I will ask for your support to preserve all this knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that perspective, and thank you, Claudia, for stepping in. We'd like to have a little bit of Q&A and interaction with the audience. I think Milagros would like to make a few follow-up comments, and unfortunately she then has to take off. So if anyone has questions to direct to her specifically, that would be helpful. I believe we'll also have someone speaking from the audience a little bit with some perspective from Bhutan. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll watch a video that's been submitted by Guyana to tell us about their story and their journey as well. So I'll give it back to Milagros for just a minute.
Thank you, and sorry that I have to leave for another meeting, but definitely I think this is the issue related to HFLD is super important, especially super important for many countries. I would like to highlight again for Peru, we are probably the only HFLD in Latin America. So this is important also to highlight. We are, because we are around other countries that unfortunately have higher rates of deforestation, and we know how that can end. So it is important to understand that we are now trying to establish the specific policies, bring in the inputs from indigenous peoples to see how we can work on this. We can distribute funding. We are working also on a benefit distribution scheme to support this process and work on how these funds can definitely come to areas where it's more needed, and especially where there are many carbon stocks that we need, that we rely on for specifically for livelihoods, especially of the most vulnerable as indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you both for making that link and making that very clear. What we're talking about here is a jurisdictional approach to crediting, which means there's a government intermediary who's managing the crediting, and that is a little bit different. It has certain advantages to it, but it also means we don't guarantee that the finance is going to flow directly to those communities who are the stewards of the forest. So we need that acknowledgement and that recognition, and we need to build those systems to ensure that the finance does flow to those communities who are the ones safeguarding the forest. So that's a critical aspect of all of this. It's a priority for CI. I think it's a priority for everyone working on this issue to ensure that that happens. If there are any questions right now you want to address to us, it looks like Millie had to take off, but we're happy to field a couple questions for a number of minutes, and then we'll move on to the video and perhaps a few comments related to Bhutan. Anyone from the floor want to make a comment or speak up? Julian.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm Julia from the Natural Climate Solution Alliance. Here? Okay. I think, well, we were also part of one of the efforts, and I think it's so important to share the information and go into the details, especially if we want to create trust in those who are going to purchase the credits. And, I work with the companies that will hopefully buy these credits. But so I just wanted to ask you, what are the plans for providing, keep track of the information and keep, the information flowing towards the demand? Because trust, information is a key ingredient for trust, and a report is great, but I think we need to do more. I think, for example, just a panel like this, to have people that talk about it is so important. So it would be great if we could find a continuous way to spread the information and get, more companies to be aware of these efforts.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, we have a number of ways that we're doing that. Within CI, but also the broader network who were involved in creating this document. And we're sort of always in the process of advancing that message, making sure that those companies have the information they need, addressing their questions, and really actively reaching out to say, this is a funny acronym, HFLD. You might not know what it's about, but let us explain to you that it's about indigenous people in the forests. It's about this critical natural asset that we have and its protection. And so walking them through that is going to be part of the ongoing work. And as you know, we're happy to partner with you and keep working together with your networks as well.
So, I forgot to say thank you very much to our colleagues from Peru, because actually having this testimonial is priceless, really, to hear your voices and to hear the situation, and the ambition and expectation is really what really makes the difference.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my friend Jigme, who's at the back. If you would like to come up and say a few words from the perspective of Bhutan. Bhutan is a very special HFLD country. Its forests are protected under its constitution, and they've done tremendous work to ensure that those forests will be protected over time. And yet they've never really received much in the way of benefits or support for that work. So I just invite you, Jigme, to explain a little bit about Bhutan's situation and what the benefits and opportunities might be if this HFLD crediting succeeds.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Jigme Tenzin. I invited my colleague from the Bhutanese government who is here to speak here, but it seems that he's stuck in another meeting. So I work for Fauna and Flora International, so I'm no longer with the Bhutanese government as of now, but I've been working with the Bhutanese government for around 10 years in this HFLD concept, so maybe I thought it would be a good opportunity to, if he's not here, take this opportunity to share our experiences with the HFLD concept. Just to a brief history, like Bhutan have been conserving forests since time immemorial. A very good example is that when Bhutan became a monarchy in 1907, there was experts who wanted to cut down trees to start the development in the country. There was no development in the country that time. But the king that time said, no, we don't want to cut down our forests. It's very important for the communities, for the country. By then there was no science, anything, but it was a belief from the king himself saying that we had to conserve forest. And that's where the conservation history started. But even before that, the communities, the indigenous communities or the people living inside the forest, they kind of consider forest as a home to their local deity. And they refer it to respect it. So even if the trend continues still now. And then it continued to in 1970s, where Bhutan came up with the forest conservation policy, which says that Bhutan will maintain 60% forest cover for all times to come. And then that evolved to the constitution in 2008, when Bhutan became a democratic constitutional monarchy. So that clause went into the constitution, and it came from the throne himself, saying that we wouldn't know how governments will be. So we have to ensure that we keep this 60% forest cover for all times to come. So it's there in the constitution, it's enshrined that Bhutan will maintain 60% forest cover for all times to come. So like Bhutan is so much committed towards protecting the forest. More than 51% is under the protected area networks. So they are legally protected, which means that there cannot be any deforestation in the area. So in that area, we have more than around 40% forest cover is in that protected areas. And there are other areas outside, like heritage forests, more than 1,000 community forests. So like in that way, the Bhutan now currently stands at around 71% under forest cover, and more than 10% under shrubs. So which could lead Bhutan as high as 80% forest cover. So having said that, in this fight against climate change, I think the reward or the climate finance has to be like distributed equally. So every hectare of forest is important for fighting against this climate change. So what I feel is like when we started with the Red Plus program, I was the Red Plus coordinator then. We knew that we were not going to benefit by Red Plus because Red Plus was more directed towards high deforestation countries. And our baseline was only around 100,000 tons per year. So it was like our deforestation rate was 0.0009. So we had almost 3 zeros in front. And the forest cover was more than 80%. And we had very less chance. But when we look at the FCPF guidance, then the GCF guidance, we are quite happy that there is a possibility where we could adjust our deforestation baselines. That's how we applied our adjustment to the forest reference emission level 1 baseline. And we have been quite supportive or part of the HFLD concept when we met in Suriname, and we have been following up very closely. So we feel that if HFLD credits are going to come, it would not only benefit Bhutan but whole HFLD nations like who have been like preserving this forest for times to come, and especially for a country like Bhutan, we are really much committed to protect the forest. As I was saying earlier, we have around 50% under protected area network, and this legal background is legal operation is very strong, which means there's also no additionality. So now when we look at carbon market, it's all about additionality, what additionally it is going to bring. But it's not really fair because if some country is doing it on its own, there has to be a support. So Bhutan could say that we will cut down our old trees now, finance us, but no, they are not doing that way. We are saying that we will preserve, we have laws, we have regulation. But that's where like we have to support countries like Bhutan or any countries in the HFLD region who is doing good in their own ways, who is doing their best. But having said that, Bhutan have been getting a lot of support because of all those concepts. Like there's Bhutan for Life project, which is for 13 years self-financing project, which kind of looks into creating a model where after 13 years, Bhutan should be able to finance its protection on its own, especially in the protected area network, and now trying to expand to other areas. But if some things like carbon credits, HFLD credits is going to come in, this is going to boost the conservationists there who are highly under pressure, saying that what do benefit we get by keeping this forest standing? Why not? Recently, there is a debate going on, say why not we allow mining in the protected areas? So see the pressure that's coming to, especially for the country, for the conservation sector, saying why to keep the forest standing? Why not we have economic activities getting into it and develop our country? So in such cases, if there are like credits going to come in, it would help not only Bhutan but other countries. So I'm sharing this because I have worked as part of the Bhutanese government, and also I've worked through this process. And I was hoping that actually my colleague who is from the government, if he spoke, it would be more weightage and more clarity. So thank you, Jason, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jigme. I appreciate the points you made about how, it was through the wisdom and recognition of how important the forests are, how integrated the society is and dependent upon those forests. That wisdom and recognition came a long time ago, before we were thinking about climate change, but it was there. And it's the same way with our indigenous colleague from the Amazon region. It's the same perspective. We know that we as people are interdependent on these forests, and we have an interest in protecting them, but it's difficult. There are pressures coming in all the time, there's always the opportunity to liquidate this natural resource for financial gain. And so in order to push back against that, there's a need to support the ongoing activities that maintain those forests rather than liquidating them and converting them into money. This, I think, is at the crux of what we're all working on here in all these halls. The concept of the need to transition to sustainable models rather than extractive ones. And it seems like, to me, the HFLD places have already achieved that realization in many cases. They've already recognized the fact that these trees should be kept standing rather than cut down. And that's a lot harder than we ever expected. So the purpose of these crediting mechanisms is to finally recognize that and provide a means and a mechanism for delivering support to carry on those activities in that way. So that it's not a disruption of the ways of life of forest people, but it's actually a reinforcement and support for them, and for the countries where they are, and for the governments to also acknowledge the fact that these forest stewards need additional support as we go down this path of transformation of our economies through the middle of the century, hopefully toward a zero emissions path. So I just want to offer the chance to make any additional comments, and then we'll transition and show a video that's related to Guyana.
Bien, gracias. Agradecer a todos los presentes por estar acá y escuchar este mensaje de los pueblos indígenas. Efectivamente, nosotros siempre hemos demandado ante estos espacios que los fondos climáticos lleguen realmente a las comunidades, y eso es lo que pedimos. Muchas gracias a todos.
I would like to thank you all for being here and to listening to the views of the indigenous peoples. We have been long requesting that the finance, the resources should go directly to the indigenous communities so that we can continue conserving our forests. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that applause. Please give a round of applause also to Milagros and Absentia, to Jigme for speaking up on behalf of Bhutan, to Claudio for stepping up at the last moment to help provide translation. So if you would please acknowledge them as well. So now I'm going to shift over and allow this, present this video that we've been provided by Pradeepa Bohalanath from Guyana. And Guyana has long been a champion of this issue. They were one of the first to achieve some finance in a bilateral way, to achieve support for protecting their forests in their HFLD status. So I think they have an important story to tell. Many of the Guyana delegation have already gone back home, and so they did us the service of providing a video to tell their story. I know that we got started late, and some of you have just arrived, so I want to just let that video play, and if you need to get up and take off, that's fine. If you want to stay and watch or interact with our speaker or myself or any of our CI colleagues here, we'll be happy to chat with you afterward. But if you'd please take a few moments to just give your attention to the video, I'm sure Pradeepa would appreciate it. I'll wrap up here, and we'll just let folks carry on after the video finishes and go do what you need to do or engage us as you wish. There's no event happening right now, so we have until 11 o'clock in this space. Thank you, everyone.